Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing.
And welcome, everybody, to Morning Magazine for this April 15th, 2020, 10:07 on the clock. And we have, for the whole hour today, Mayor Zach Vruwink, Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Zach.
Good morning.
We also want to say a good morning to our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. Kevin, good morning to you and everybody over there. We appreciate you guys being with us today. Mayor, first off, how you doing?
You know, it's been an emotionally roller coaster of a week. The election results certainly were a shock. I think I can say so myself. Equally shocking as sad, but, I think equally as proud of what we were able to accomplish in 8 years in the city. And, while it'll be difficult to say goodbye on Monday, I think to be somebody that was 24 and elected mayor of their hometown and have served for 8 years is really an incredible thing. And, I certainly appreciate all the confidence the voters and the trust the voters placed in me over the last 8 years. I think it's sort of ironic to be leaving a city in a state that it is in the times we find ourselves in. For me anyway, it mirrors a lot of the city that I took over 8 years ago in 2012 when we had pretty high unemployment rates. Community confidence was certainly way down, and I felt as sort of the chief cheerleader. My role was to really put forth a vision that community members maybe dreamt about, thought that our city could achieve. And so I think on a measure of that, I think we were successful, and I'm really proud of that.
Well said. And I think one of the things, and I want to make sure that our listeners know that the phone lines are open, 715-424-2600. We may not have a whole lot of time to take questions, but we are open to taking some questions
Definitely.
today. And one of the things that I've heard from listeners since the election is some of the frustration with that, with being able to vote and basically having to put a lot of their health at risk to be an American and exercise our right as Americans to vote. There's been some frustration with that, and I think that it's one of those things where we can all understand, whether you agree with it or not. Yeah. You can certainly understand the situation being a bit hectic and
That's
everything.
Right.
One of the things I have also heard from a lot of our listeners, and we here at WFHR, our listenership has gotten a lot younger as we've gone along here. We certainly have our tried and true members and listeners out there that we love and adore and appreciate, but we have gotten younger. And one of the things that I've heard from a lot of those younger people is that this was the first time that they felt they were represented, that they had a voice. With that responsibility that you felt, how did that go for you over the years, having that? Because as you mentioned, you're a young mayor, right. I believe the youngest mayor that we've had in Wisconsin Rapids. So when it came to kind of carrying that responsibility, not just of young people's voices and what they feel, but being a young person and being like, well, if I mess this up, and I'm talking back in 2012, you're first starting and everything, they're never going to let another young person do this again.
Right.
So, I mean, you had a lot on your plate when
That's
it
right.
comes to that. How did you go handling that over the years?
I always reminded myself it was an enormous responsibility. I think the gravity of it hit probably a year after you stopped drinking from that fire hose. I mean, you get a year under your belt and you start to understand the routine and seasonality of certain things. When you understand the resident complaints of every season are very different from one from the next. You understand the work that the city does, the annual budgeting process. I think once I got through that first year, I really understood, the scope and the gamut of the position. I mean, I had many conversations with former mayors heading into the position and the role, so I had their perspectives. But everyone is different, right? Everyone is an individual, and I think I wanted to take that responsibility and as it is my nature, to be a maximizer, to be somebody that says, we've got a finite amount of time, and it'll all come to a conclusion at some point. I think I had some wise mentors that were mayors that have told me that over the years, that you're not mayor forever and you shouldn't be. And so therefore, there will be an expiration. And so you're going to have to really prioritize. I think that by nature of government, we're an institution that builds on itself, right? And so over 100 years, as Wisconsin Rapids celebrates its centennial this year, or 125 or whatever that it was that our city was in existence as multiple cities, there were administrations and generations of leadership. And I think what's interesting to me is over my tenure, I've heard a lot from residents about certain administrations that they've observed and supported as mayors have come and gone. And I always tried to take what was best from those and to emulate that myself, recognizing that the city is absolutely in a different place. The world's a different place than what it was during administrations like the Penza years and others. And I think, we really wanted to take advantage of the limited time that we have to accomplish things. And the trouble, though, is the gratification of accomplishing something isn't necessarily when you're cutting the ribbon. There's all that pre-work that goes behind the scenes, and something that's something that I think, looking back upon, I wish there was less of. But it's just by nature of the government and the institution. I have to be a team player. It's not my show. It's mine and the city council and the administration that I work with at city government, or at city hall, I should say. And so I think, those dynamics all play into the element of success, and certainly the gravity of taking on something as monumental as running a city. I think, but I'm really proud. I'm really proud that we were able to do things that we thought that we could do, but weren't quite sure we could actually accomplish. And so for that, the city's in a better place.
Yeah. And when it comes to that, where the city is right now, we have a number of projects that are going on that are not finished.
Right.
And, we're changing coaches midstream here and everything like that can be a little concerning for some, some people out there. How do you feel about that going forward?
I'd be kidding myself if I believed that everything would carry on the same as it would if I were mayor. And that's, for a good thing or a bad thing, and people can draw their own conclusions to that. But I think, in large part, those accomplishments will stand. I think, I don't have a question about whether or not we're going to pull the plug on something that's been a major investment. And I hope for the things that we didn't get accomplished, that those things are given some consideration going forward. The city has a tremendous amount of needs. It did when I stepped in. It does today. Those needs have evolved. And I think, I've offered my support to my successor. I met with him yesterday, and I shared that I'd be, for the sake of unity, I'm happy to serve on a commission or a board. I'm a resident of the city first and foremost, and a taxpayer as well. And so I'd love to be a part of the city going forward, and in a small part. I mean, I'm not going to, I told him my predecessors didn't breathe down my neck or look over my shoulder a ton, but, they monitored and shared their advice and input where appropriate. And so I offered my willingness to do that. I don't know if that offer will be accepted, but I've extended it. And I hope that, our community will continue to succeed and find its success as it goes forward.
All you can do is offer, and I think it's a class move to do that. Not certainly prying about any details of it, but how did the conversation go with you and Shane Blazer?
Yeah, it was good. I think, he's got a very different outlook as the campaign indicated. He from the beginning said that he wanted to take the city in a different direction, and I think he'll work to do that. I'm not certain I know what that direction is. I'm not sure he knows what that direction is, other than it being different. And so I think, and that's what the voters ultimately selected at the end of the day. And we can probably touch on, the whole election as you indicated in the democracy stuff. But I think, Shane knows many of the players in the city. Certainly has never had the perspective as mayor. I think the city clerk's role is very, very different. And so he'll be able to build on that experience that he's had working in the clerk's office, and certainly on the 2 years as he was on city council as well.
Much like you brought a different perspective when you first started, similar to him, just in a different way, in a different avenue.
Yep.
And we certainly appreciate that, because I've reached out and I have not been, he has not reached back to me. And I tried during the election process to find out more about him and what his, saying you want something different is one thing. What specifically do you want to change?
Right.
I was not able to hear back from him. I'm looking forward to having him in studio with us and being able to interview and talk with him and find out more about this. But it is so important to me, too, that there is that transition. And I give you both credit for that, being able to be, adults about this and handle it that way.
Yeah.
We have a call coming in. We're going to take from the listener real quick here. Good morning. Do you have a question for the mayor?
Yes, I would like to just ask, how does this affect your role now on the League of Municipalities? Are you still, and I can take my answer off the air, Are you still involved in that to any capacity?
It's a great question.
Great question. Thank you.
So it is my hope that I'll be able to stay involved. They have a constitution that provides for how people can still be involved or still be eligible to serve within the league. As league president now, my term would officially end in October, but I would need some other connection to a municipality in order to retain that. And so, in talking with the director yesterday, and many of the board members have reached out and encouraged me to find an avenue to stay connected with the organization, at least to serve out the rest of my term. And that's, in some respect, how and why I want to continue to stay connected to the city here, to be able to see some things through that need some transition. And it's not about handing a file over or a phone number over. You need some of that coddling, for a lack of a better word, to carry out some of these priorities. So it's my hope, and I aspire to stay connected, but it remains to be seen if that's going to be possible here in the coming weeks.
It's a great question from the listener, and it's one that I was going to ask too, is about, what you are on a number of different, boards or things like that and stuff, and continuing to do that kind of work. Is that something that you want to do?
Yeah, I think in some respects, people have always thought that I had a plan B, and I will be as fully transparent about that, and I have been transparent, whether people believe me or not, that I don't have a plan B.
Mm-hmm.
I'm literally going to take time off. I'm going to take some time off, and taking time off in a pandemic when you can't do anything or go anywhere or be with anybody is really, really not as exciting as I think if our life were a little bit normal right now. But I've been gracious to build a great network of people, and I would love to stay connected. The league is one. There's other organizations that I've been involved in that, my capacity will certainly change. I don't necessarily think my predecessor or my successor will be involved in those organizations, but he may, and I would certainly offer to transition him and make those contacts and extend those invitations for his benefit. But I've gotten some calls, and I'll tell you, I'm not ready to say I'm going to do something tomorrow, but hopefully over the coming weeks, because my term will end at midnight or 12:01 on Tuesday morning, and so I'll be officially unemployed, like many of our community members unfortunately find themselves in right now.
When it comes to the voting, and I appreciate you getting into this with me, because I think it's one of those things that is frustrating for people that even got the chance to vote.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that it's not this is not a Republican or Democrat thing.
Right.
This is something that both sides I've heard voices from. I've heard voices from our listeners about, and not just locally but statewide.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts about the voting process and how that went down?
Heading into the election, particularly being on the ballot, we had the complexity and the adaptation that our campaign had to make, and how we were going to get our message out to voters, and how we were going to motivate people to exercise their right to vote and remind them there's an election going on, all those things. But campaign aside, I was with many of my peers. Over 300 of my peers, whether they were mayors, village presidents, or city clerks, village clerks, that all said, if you're going to do something with the election, you have to do so now. And that was before early voting happened. So it was about 2 weeks prior to the election, a little before. And we sent a sign-on letter around. Many of us were really passionate about that if there was going to be a change, they needed to make it then. And then having talked to the governor personally on at least one occasion since that letter was sent, and I asked him, was he planning to make any changes? And he had said, no, we're going to continue on with the election. It was actually the Friday before he made the change and initiated the his proposal, or what he thought he could do. I think he really respected the legislative process, saying that the legislative leaders needed to weigh in and affirm whether this was a good thing or not to have the election. And when he made the change, and subsequently the initial repeal from the Republicans to reinstate the election, I maintain that, as you had indicated earlier, that people really were in a conundrum. They really didn't know whether they should risk their public health. I, for one, on one hand, was telling everyone to stay home. Right? That you're safer at home. You shouldn't be out in public. You should be making one grocery shopping trip a week. You shouldn't be congregating or visiting with loved ones or neighbors. But then on the other hand, I was telling them that they should go exercise their right to vote. And, we had a tremendous amount of early voters. We had, I think, 4,000 ballot requests. About 3,500 of those were turned back in. But when the moving target happened about when ballots had to be postmarked, and whether the witness requirement was going to stay, it created a tremendous amount of confusion, particularly amongst older voters that didn't have a loved one or a family member or somebody in their home. I mean, my campaign was acted as a witness on a number of ballots. I mean, it was just down to that. Like, I would have never imagined that. I would have never believed that our democracy would have achieved the level of kind of frustration that it did and stress. As of when the results were reported on Monday, the clerk advised me that there was almost 100 ballots in the city of Wisconsin Rapids that won't be counted. I mean, it's 100 votes. If I was one of those 100 voters, I would be heartbroken.
Absolutely.
Like, that is just ripping somebody's right out of their hand, and how that can be constitutionally acceptable is just unbelievable to me. And so I think, there's a lot of stories around the state about that, and I just think, personally for the Wisconsin Rapids story, it's very discouraging for somebody that has taken that right to vote and takes it seriously, right? They weigh the candidates. I mean, this isn't a candidate question for me. It's a leader issue, and the fact that we found ourselves in this situation at the last minute. Fortunately, we worked really hard to retain our polling places. I'll give myself a little credit that the clerk was under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and all of her poll workers, and we owe them a great deal of gratitude for showing up to work the polls, because we didn't have to go down to one polling place like many places had to do. The whole Shopko thing, I mean, that was me working over the weekend, evening hours, to get the ownership group in New York City to agree to allow us to use the space. And it wasn't easy. But it was necessary. I mean, I said to the clerk personally, I said, if we're going to preserve people's democratic right to vote in this city, we need to continue to eliminate confusion. We need to make it as easy as possible. We pushed a lot of absentee ballot information to the voters, and I know they responded positively to that. But when the election results were tallied and the turnout numbers were tallied, the city did not have as much turnout as it would have had if we didn't have such confusion. And I will maintain that with complete confidence because, my campaign was preparing for probably 5,500 plus voters. But when all of the confusion and all of the unknowns happened and the back and forth, I think I'm confident people stayed home. I talked to people that stayed home.
I know they did. Yes, I heard.
And that's young and old people alike. It wasn't an
Exactly.
age thing. It was all over the place.
Actually knew a lot of younger people staying home than older people, and not by a huge margin, but by some. And you hit on a couple of things there. And this is we are not an opinion station, so nobody wants to hear my take or anything like
Sure.
that. But anytime that one of our most tried and true American rights is tampered on or not played not well, not done right. We as Americans should not accept that.
Right.
We just can't accept it. Whether it is 1 vote or 100 votes not counted. And just think about that statement we just both said. Votes not counted. That is something that is not American. That's something that goes on in a third world country or a dictatorship or something like that. So none of us should stand for that.
Right.
And it's not about your guy not winning or something like that, or a Democrat or Republican thing or anything. This is an American thing.
Absolutely.
If you're an American citizen, that is something that should bother you.
Yeah.
That is something that you should want to be heard. And even if it wasn't your vote that wasn't counted, you should care about your fellow citizens' vote not being counted.
Right.
I do want to thank you for the work that you did, though, to get people to able to go to the polls. And with that, and not just you, but everybody in your cabinet, everybody throughout the whole state and in other places working together, both, bipartisanly, a lot of people working together to make that happen. Could have been a lot worse. I think we all wanted it to be better, but given the situation, there is no playbook for this. Good on everybody in the state, at least getting what we were able to do.
That's right.
I feel like we can have two thoughts in our head at once. We can be frustrated with this situation and at the same proud of our state and what we were able to accomplish here, because some states weren't even able to do that.
Yeah, and we lost half our poll workers heading up to the day of the election, and we rallied. We rallied friends and neighbors and family members in some cases for more poll workers to show up, so that way we didn't have chaos in election day, and the whole reporting the results a week later added a whole nother level of complexity in the whole absentee ballot thing. And you're right, there's a lot of good that we can point to in this. That democracy did survive. People, some international reporting said democracy died, and while elements of democracy died, certainly. friendly, people's right to vote and their voices were still heard on election day.
I think some of democracy, some of it might be on life support, but it's not dead.
Yeah.
And as long as we're kicking and living, as long as America as a country is going, we'll get it back. We'll bring it back to life. Hopefully, here's hoping. I wanted to be able to get into this too before we went to our break. The COVID-19 situation.
Yeah.
I know that we've got some, I don't know about updates, but some information about that we want to pass along to people.
Yeah, and there's a fair amount we could talk about. We can come out of break and talk about it too. But
Yeah.
The long and short of it on the public health crisis front, the social distancing and physical distancing elements are working. They're working here in Wisconsin Rapids. They're working working statewide, and I'm really proud of that because I know it's very, very difficult on all of us to continue to uphold that. I think many of us are asking ourselves, how long can we do it for?
Yeah.
But the long and short of it is absolutely our social distancing and physical distancing working. We don't have an outbreak in Wisconsin Rapids because of that. I think if we had, I'm almost certain if we had if the travel rules and some of the other guidelines were not being upheld by residents, we would be having a much different crisis on our hands. And, the whole point of this is flattening the curve. And why we flatten the curve is because there just is not enough capacity in our medical systems to handle an outbreak, dealing with the virus, with the pandemic. And I think that's good on all of us. We owe ourselves a pat on the back because of that.
We will take a really quick break. We have Wisconsin Rapids Media in with us. Again, shout out to them and Kevin for being in studio with us today. And a big thank you to our Wisconsin Rapids Mayor, Zach Vruwink, for being with us. We'll be back with more with Zach on Morning Magazine coming up here on AM 1320 WFHR. We have Morning Magazine. We have Kevin Bargender from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media joining us, along with, of course, Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink with us. I want to let you know that we are open to taking your phone calls, 424-2600. If you have a question for the mayor, please feel free to go ahead and give us a call at 424-2600. Otherwise, I want to continue with what we were talking about with the COVID-19 situation and how it's affecting the area. Maybe we can touch on the businesses and how that's going.
Yeah. So I've always talked about it in sort of a dual crisis, and I think you hear a lot of elected leaders talk about it in that, we've got a health crisis, but we definitely have an economic crisis on our hands. And we've, over the last couple of weeks, held weekly business briefings. We were really fortunate to be joined with some very special guests over that time. Congressman Ron Kind joined a briefing to give us an update on the federal stimulus. There was so much in that stimulus bill we could have covered in over hours. I mean, it's literally thousands of pages. But it was really important for me to get our local businesses the information that will pertain to them and their recovery. And so Congressman Ron Kind a couple of Fridays ago shared that briefing with us. In this last briefing, we did a newsletter briefing, but before that, we were joined with the CEO and Secretary of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, Missy Hughes, who has only been on the job for 6 months in her role, but shared a great outlook on how, number one, WDC has a unique role to play in Wisconsin's recovery and the economic space, but also that her administration will be listening. They really want to know from local businesses what are some of their needs that are not being fulfilled or met by the federal government, knowing that the federal stimulus, as large as it is still going to leave places short. The state should have a responsibility in filling those gaps. Locally, we don't have the means to be doling out cash grants like you're seeing from the state and federal government. Unlike the Treasury, they can just keep printing more money. We can't, right? And so one of the pieces that I called for in the last couple of weeks is a postponement or the ability for us to waive penalty and interest on property tax payments. And I'm very pleased that even just yesterday, now the Assembly has passed a bill in Madison to allow us at the city level to postpone when those installments will be due. So folks that are making second and third installment payments we're supposed to be at the end of April and then into July, those will be postponed or can be postponed provided that the state continues to move through that and passes the bill. It's really important because I heard from a lot of our local businesses that they were having to choose between making payroll and paying and keeping food on the table or paying their property taxes. And that's not, we don't want to put people in that position right now. There's about $6 million in property tax payments that have not been received. About half of what the city collects was not paid yet. And so I think $6 million of postponement, one, the city can afford it. We've got liquidity, we've got reserves to cover things. Despite what you hear, the city sits in a very strong financial position and has one of the best credit ratings. And our credit rating will not be affected by allowing people some more time to pay their property taxes, especially if they have found themselves unemployed or found themselves in a childcare situation where they've had to pay for childcare and they weren't expecting it. Some of those things. So, I think the businesses they'll need as much assistance from the city and from the mayor's office as they can get. That's something I'm very proud that we were able to do over the last 8 years, is to really listen to local businesses and to really support their interests. You can't please everyone in this business. I learned that the hard way early on. You try to please everyone, you please nobody in the process. And I think, I think that our business community is better because of our partnership and the strength we've built. The Chamber of Commerce has been a great partner for us, and they're going to continue to be a great resource. So if folks are looking for information, I can't say how the city's going to address the economic crisis going forward, but I can say with confidence the Chamber and the CVB are really interested in supporting their groups, whether it's small businesses or hotels in the community. They're going to be faced with just unprecedented challenges as the travel restrictions continue to linger for our hotels. For the new owners of the Mead who bought their hotel and property in a really disappointing time, I think, is to say the least. For them, these businesses are going to need the city's support, and so I look forward to whatever package and support the mayor's office can provide in that role too.
Was there anything else out of the briefing that maybe people didn't hear about, or maybe didn't get talked about as much that we could touch on for people?
This is the same for whether it's the city applying for grants and programs as it is for businesses. If you don't apply for it, those dollars will go somewhere else. And we tried to stress to our local businesses that the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov is the website. SBA.gov is really, it's a little challenging. It's very government speak, but those resources are going to be critical to bridging the divide and the gap that these businesses are facing, whether they're going to reopen or whether they're just going to have to stay closed in the future. So make sure they're taking advantage of those resources. And I would encourage our local businesses to find an accountant. That's probably the best place. Talk to your accountant. If you don't have one, pick up the phone and call some of the reputable accounting firms in town. There's, literally billions of dollars coming to local governments and to small businesses. And if you're not at the table, you're not going to get the money. It's going to go to large urban areas. And I'm proud, even just as mayor over the tenure, that we've prioritized that we were fighting for our fair share every time. It's our money and we deserve it. But you can't just say, no, we're not going to spend, we're not going to take the resources, because especially in times like this, you're going to need it.
We have a question coming into right now. And good morning. Do you have a question for the mayor?
Yes, I do. Mayor, what do you think thing was that your most biggest accomplishment was while you were mayor and while you were mayor? And number two is, 2 years from now, you'll be eligible to run again. Would you do it? And I'll hang up and listen.
Real quickly, I gotta tell these listeners here, don't try to take my job. This is the second time now one of the listeners has taken my next question. You guys, come on. Yeah. No, actually, a very, very good questions. We really appreciate you, sir. Nice job. Go ahead, sir.
I think my proudest accomplishment, there's a couple. I think the first, you can't measure it, but I can feel it, and there's a barometer that a mayor will have about certain things. I think the community confidence, the fact that we felt more self-confident today than we did 8 years ago, the sky was falling for many, and whether they were unemployed or whether their business was facing closure, the fact that there's community confidence in so many ways, that our young people are not looking at this place as a place to leave, but as a place to grow roots. There's so many anecdotes, and I think it's evidenced in the strength of the real estate market, that we've had the strongest real estate market in the city in the last number of decades. Mm-hmm. The fact that new businesses and industry like Metalco are seeing Wisconsin Rapids as a place of opportunity, that they're citing the investments that we've made in riverfront and aquatics and quality of life as being reasons why they decided to grow roots here versus the dozens or hundreds of other options they had. I would say that those would be some of the key accomplishments. Certainly prioritizing youth, that our city's youth, like our seniors, have just as much to say about the future of this community is something I'm really, really proud of. And I think, the growth in our tax base, our tax rate has remained flat because of the fact that the tax base has grown. If we didn't grow and attract the developments that we've had, we would have had to pay more in taxes. And I'm proud of that. I think, I don't know if I touted it as much as I should have. There's always going to be a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda, and I'm going to try not to go there in the future because it's not probably healthy. But I'm really proud of those things, and I think our city again is in a far better place than what it was when I started. And it's not to say that others couldn't have done things and couldn't have taken the same playbook and done the same. And that's why it's really not about me. It's really been about what the community has said to me, what their priorities were. And my role as mayor was to elevate those and to say, yes, we have a riverfront that's underutilized, that cities kill to have the asset that we have running through the center of our town. And I think businesses are responding, industries responding, our residents are responding with major reinvestment, putting their money where their mouth is and really where their house is, which is really cool. Second part of the question, though, 2 years is a short while. We had a little bit of discussion about this off air. I don't know what the next month holds, so I can't say I don't know what the next 2 years is going to hold. I love this
I don't
place.
blame him for asking, but I think he even knew. It's
kind of funny. Last night when I left City Hall, I walked out of my office where all the mayor's pictures, and there's 22 former mayors in our city, and I looked at the years of service, and somebody that served 8 years is not a unicorn or not somebody. There's a league of us that have served 8 years, or some that served 10. Two handful, I think, two of them that have served longer than that. But there's one mayor in particular that served 3 times with 2 years every time between the time he served. And so I didn't know, it didn't stick with me the last time I looked at it. So I thought that I'd share that with the listener. Because
I'm glad you did.
It's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Before we take it to our next caller here and our next question, I do want to touch on something else you said, just so we get it in there, because I didn't know if we'd have time to. But so many of the listeners I have heard from have been younger listeners, or listener in my age group, in the 30s and 40s and such. And this is the first time that in this community that they have felt like they were heard. And that is a huge thing. And while I respect, and we all understand that live in the Wisconsin Rapids or Wood County area, we understand that the majority of a lot of our people are seniors, and they have a voice, and it is an incredibly important voice. And we're not here without them paving the way.
Right.
So nobody's taking anything from that. But we have a future to think about.
Right.
And this community, this area has a future to think about. They have to think about 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, and keeping this area with younger people. And when I was a kid, when I was graduating high school, everybody was looking to get out.
Yep.
I'm not kidding. Kidding. Every single kid I knew in my senior class wanted to leave.
Yeah.
It's different now. More people are staying. So a big fear and a big concern is that voice is still heard, that they are still represented. And I appreciate the work that you have done with that.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and get to our caller and their question. Good morning. You're on the air.
Yes, I would like to know what other industries we are getting into this town, or what we did get in here.
Sure. Happy to answer that question. So
thank you for the call.
The most recent industry that you'll see is a new industry, and that's if you take a drive out on 48th Street, just north of Washington Street, between 54 and the city's Rapids East Commerce Park, Metalco, which is an aluminum manufacturer. They're from Canada, and they're building an $80 million facility. Initially, they'll create 80 jobs. That's their expectation. That's what they're on the hook for, to receive any city incentives. And so that industry will basically take raw aluminum, extrude it, melt it down, and extrude it into finished product. Then not finished product, but in slabs that'll be taken to make finished products. So their customers are of the likes of Crystal Finishings and Mosinee, which makes a lot of window and camper and recreational type vehicle applications. And so that's probably the most recent industry that has been an attraction for the city. More semi-recently to that is Mariani's had over my time 3 expansions in the city. They've tripled their workforce. Every time they've grown, they've added employees. And so today, while they're operating with a lot of robotics, they employ well over 100 people. They were in the 30s when I started as mayor, and so that's an industry that's grown really well, just south of the Metalco facility. And they deal in the cranberry processing, but they're also taking other fruits and nuts that they produce worldwide in their facility, and really proud of that. The one that's adjacent to here isn't the most popular because we've had to work with them to eliminate their emissions, which is the dehydration facility, and they took a vacant trucking depot that employed nobody and now employs well over 20 people, and that's another facility that's done well. The other industries in the community, there's been a fair amount of small warehouse type developments, just one north of here, and so they take in product to store for other industry. But I think we've always been a mill town, and I think having relationships with our paper mill, while I can't say it's kept every job here in the community, but we've worked with them. They've tried to reduce their tax base in the city, and we've tried to fight that every step of the way. Otherwise, we're going to pay more in taxes. But I'm glad that they're still here, and I can't say much for the future other than I'm optimistic that they find a market, that they continue to produce paper in the community. There's also a lot of smaller commercial businesses. So whether it's Wheeler Chevrolet, just south of here, they took a really blighted corner, which used to be an auto parts, basically a junkyard, and they've invested $5 million in building their facility and now expanding into a new facility. Johnson & Sons down West Grand. I mean, there's just countless examples of commercial and small businesses. But really, attracting industry is changing. It's changed today. You're not going to attract a new business and an industry to a community, and I've maintained that that's going to produce and create 800 jobs or 500 jobs, whatever people think is the desirable. That's not type of economic development anymore.
Yeah, there's no twisting of the arm that's going to make a big conglomerate like Amazon or something like that come to Wisconsin Rapids.
That's right.
But the realistic approach to it has been noted, like been noticeable with that, where you've been able to keep these other businesses you've been able to bring in is one thing, but the other part of that too is the businesses you've been able to keep here.
That's right.
And so much a part of that too is again that young workforce and people not graduating high school and leaving the area right away or going off, doing something similar to that, being able to take advantage of that and use that as well.
That's right.
And another point to it too is what you touched on earlier about the state tax, the city tax. Not the flux of that would be a lot different if these businesses you had mentioned or some of the other things about this weren't going on. We would know the difference there.
That's right.
Let's go ahead and take one more caller here before we take a quick break. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, James and the Mayor.
Good morning.
I was wondering if you had heard anything about any possible tenants for the old Shopko building, and I'll hang up and listen.
Sure.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. So we had been working with potential tenants for the former Staples building, and the same tenant that was looking at that had looked at the Shopko property. The owners of the Shopko building own 80 stores, so we're basically a dot on the map for them and their motivation. I can't say how motivated they are about this market, but I know that they've been interested in our input. There's been a couple of light industrial type users that we've sort of said, it's not been the best fit. There's industrial spaces in this community. There's warehouse space that they could take up to do their operation or enterprise, but there's nothing ready to announce. And I think with retailers, the retailer that we were working with on 8th Street in the former Staples building said at least 6 months of a hold until they make any decisions, but no formal tenant on the Shopko property today. It's likely that it'll be split and subdivided, similar to what the former mall was done, because it's 110,000 square feet. It's just too large for a single user to take on unless it's going to be warehousing or light industrial manufacturing.
Although that space would be perfect for a Simpsons museum.
Yeah, right.
I really do feel like. I mean, that's something to think about for
indoor
the
mini
future.
golf.
There you go. Yeah.
It's amazing how big that building is. I walked through it when we were getting ready for the polling place. It's just massive.
You forget too. If for some of us haven't been in there in a while, but as a kid, I remember it just being a bigger place and stuff. I want to get into kind of recapping your run here and some thank yous. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more with our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, and of course Mayor Zach Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine, AM 1320 WFHR. We have Morning Magazine. We are joined by our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, Kevin Bargender. Bargender. I got to get the gen in there. Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate you being here, man. And, of course, our own Wisconsin Rapids Mayor, Zach Vruwink, with us right now. And again, want to remind you, we've got about 10 minutes left to show. If you have a quick question for the mayor, 424-2600. As long as we have the time, though, I kind of wanted to do a bit of a recap with you and kind of looking back. And one of our callers touched on it earlier about, what you're most proud of. But instead of just kind of narrowing it down to one thing, what are some of the things that over this run you've been very proud of and that you would just like to touch on before we let you go?
A lot of my priority had been placed in really changing the look and the feel of the city. That while we are very proud of our blue collar mill roots and manufacturing roots, if we were going to be an industry or a city on the move that attracted industry and residents, you have to dial up the way your city looks and feels, because it helps confidence, improves confidence. It also improves just the overall attractiveness to visitors and such. And I think, whether it's street reconstructions through our urban center, our downtown, when you look at East Grand Avenue and you look at some of the beautification efforts, and that, a big thank you to our residents. Like I didn't come in with a playbook and say this is exactly what we're going to do, but residents really informed me, and we were able to elevate their thinking and their priorities around the look and the feel of the city. I think some say the Aquatic Center, which is certainly more recently. I do have a lot of pride in the fact that it took the city 20 some years to accomplish that project. And even when I signed the contracts for the contractors to get going, it didn't feel real. Yeah. But the other day after the election, I drove by the facility, and if people haven't driven by it at night, it's got a very progressive, cool feel to it. It really does. It really signifies, I think, the future of this city and the way the position the city is in right now. I think capitalizing on the riverfront, we mentioned that asset that we have, that it's not an asset unless you do something with it. In fact, it's a liability if you don't do something with it. And, we spent a bit of money to repair the river wall and to do riverbank stabilization. And people sometimes misinterpret it as just a park improvement project. While we were working in those spaces, we should have improved them, and we did. And I'm proud of that. And I think, when all the pandemic passes and the growing season starts and hopefully the community prioritizes programming in those spaces, there's no reason we don't have a concert series on the riverfront or more festivals and events. And I think, whether it's the new balcony feature or just the whole improvements in the park system or Demet's Park, I think the other one that's going to be seen, and hopefully the new administration prioritizes it, is trail signage and wayfinding signage, that as we attract visitors, because of the Hotel Meade's efforts to draw in more visitors, that those visitors should take advantage of the great trail system we have. It's second to none. And I think, it's those types of things that I'm most proud of. Certainly we talked about the industry and business pieces, but I'm also really proud to have worked with a really talented group of people at City Hall and within the departments at the city. I think while we oftentimes didn't agree on absolutely everything, we tried to understand where each other were coming from. And I think as mayor, the unfortunate thing is you have to make decisions that sometimes don't play favorably in somebody's mind, especially if somebody feels like they personally need to get something out of something, and I tried to always be very fair. I wanted to make sure people understood where I was coming from, that I didn't play favorites, that we really were objective and very fair and equitable with inside city government. And again, that didn't sit well with some folks, but that's just who I was. And I didn't want to be thought of as the good old boys mayor. I think I fought that coming in, being that I was not a member of the city council. I didn't have strong relationships really with any department heads or any city staff. And so I think I'm really proud of that. I think, at the end here, while I was able to build relationships with people and be friends with, to the extent that you could, I was trying to be as fair as possible.
One other note on that too, as far as when we're talking economics and everything with the riverfront, and the old tried and true, you got to spend money to make money, sometimes to keep money. Yeah. And those improvements are part of what led to people wanting to stay in this area, right. And which of course affects us the economy and all these different things and so many other ways. So just to again bring that back a little bit, and I also want to mention before we get to our caller here, the Youth Council was one of the things that I thought was one of the more unique and greater things to come from this run. I thought it's been really cool, and I really hope that continues. Because I know that having some of those kids in here in studio with us and talking to them, they got a light lit in them that doesn't come otherwise. And I want that fire to stay there. We all want that to stay there, those kids to feel that and stuff. So, I mean, that's another one that I'm really proud of that. Let's go ahead and get to a caller real quick here. We've only got a couple minutes left with the mayor, so we need your question to be fast.
How come our industrial parks don't grow in Rapids? I mean, you go up to Marshfield to that old Norwood area, and every time I don't go up there that often, but it seems like every time I go up there, there's a new building going up, and the one just north of where you're located, there hasn't been much going on in there in the last 20 years. Is there a reason for that? And then I'll get off and.
I appreciate the call. I mean, I would encourage you to maybe take a second look. I think if you drive through the West Side Industrial Park, number one, it's almost at capacity. I think the city only owns a couple acres, maybe 2-3 acres left in this park. Military Affairs owns a bunch of land that they're probably not going to use in the foreseeable future, and the city's tried to buy it back and get something going there. But the West Side Industrial Park is pretty much at capacity. The Rapids East Commerce Park, we've had a couple projects that I didn't identify, but one which is a fertilizer facility that uses the rail activity there. But I think the real reason comes down to the way decisions have been made in the city that, over time when people had a perception of Wisconsin Rapids as not being business friendly, that carries weight over generations. And I fought it. I know when I talk with prospects, they had this feeling and belief about what the mill had or the influence past generations and leadership had toward business, and that weighed heavily on why they never even considered Wisconsin Rapids. But I also think that we haven't addressed some of the major needs in this community. Housing has been something that our residents and neighborhoods have fought for years. And until we can grapple with the fact that our housing has to grow in the region, we're not going to attract a single new business. When you've got 100% unemployment or 100% employment, basically, you're not going to attract a new business because they're not going to want to cannibalize business employees from other businesses. Yeah. So it's addressing some of those things around the fringes that sometimes aren't as evident, I would say, as reasons why some of our business parks, to your assessment, hasn't grown to the degree that maybe you compare to other communities. And these other communities are progressive communities on the move. And if Wisconsin Rapids is not a progressive community on the move, we better get satisfied with the way things are because they're going to be like that for generations to come.
This is part of the reason I keep bringing up the youth. Yeah. If we want to take care of all of our citizens, young, old, middle-aged, whatever, we've got to be able to do what you were just talking about there. And the only way to do that is by, being progressive, looking ahead, thinking in the future. The old ways are not working, or not so much not working, but we are evolving as a country, as communities and everything. And we've got to be able to pivot. We've got to be able to do that. Otherwise, it becomes a ghost town.
That's right.
And wanted to give you time to get any, also finish your recapping if you wanted, or any thank yous that you wanted to give.
Yeah, I think, the other thank you is the City Council. I've enjoyed a great partnership with them. I've worked with a lot of members that are no longer on the council, and, they saw the vision, maybe it took all of us a bit of time to understand what the elements of the vision were, and I appreciate them enabling the city to take on a challenge, to make something different, to make something better with something that maybe didn't feel like it had a lot of energy and life to it. And so I think, working with especially senior members of the city council that served for a long time, I think Marion Hokamp, one in particular, I just remember the anecdote. She was on the council longer than I had been alive, and she stuck with us to understand that our city needed to move in a direction or it was simply going to wither and die. And so it was that spirit, I think, that Marion and others in the community that, when I went door to door while I could this spring, people appreciated that. And they thanked me for challenging, a lot of them said, well, maybe I didn't think about that being the right move for the city at the time, but they're starting to see the elements and the pieces come together. So, I think I really owe a great deal of gratitude to the residents of the city. And I'm a proud resident just like the rest of them, and on Monday I'll become a citizen and resident, and I'll miss dearly the work and the role of the mayor, but I'm willing to support the city in any way that I can. My invitation still stands, and I hope that Mayor-elect Blazer will take me up on the opportunity to support him. I don't want to linger and I don't want to hang over, but sure. I think there are some things that the city needs to continue to do, or it's just going to continue to face an uphill battle to grow itself.
On a personal note, I do want to mention, and I want to thank you, not only because the man who should be in this chair and used to be in, Carl Hilke, really enjoyed you, really enjoyed talking to you, working with you and everything, and used to talk to me all the time about it. And is, transitioning it to me and somebody who is not good at this job, and
Give
learning
yourself
as
some more credit than that.
learning as I go. You were one of the first people I interviewed, and you could not have made the job easier for me and been worked with me better. And I cannot thank you enough for that. And this here station. Certainly, look forward to meeting Mr. Blazer and talking with him, and we'll be doing interviews like you and I have done in the future. But as of just looking back, just for me especially, this being a new gig to me and stuff, and this kind of a new process. Can't thank you enough for the cooperation and working together on that. And when you get through this break and everything, you take some time off. I'm gonna have you co-host the morning hour with me sometime. I'm gonna drag you in because especially if you're not working, man, you got nothing else to do.
I think if there's one thing that I look forward to most in this job is Monday morning quarterbacking all of the decisions that the city makes. Because I've heard for the last 8 years, everybody's Monday morning quarterbacks and what we should do differently and this and that. And I'm going to join the rest of them. Maybe I'll take you up on that. I'm not going to say I'm going to take your day job, go after that. But I think it'll be fun to provide some commentary on things.
That's hilarious because that's very similar to what I heard Brett Favre say when he retired. He's looking so forward to being able to take shots. That's a great one.
Don't talk about Brett Favre because then people are going to think I'm going to come back.
Oh, right. But again, Mayor, appreciate you. Thank you so much for everything. And you take care, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, James. I appreciate it. And it's so long for now. It's not a goodbye.
Right on. Big thank you to our friends over at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media again. And again, a big thank you to Mayor Zach Vruwink for joining us. We got more Morning Magazine coming up tomorrow. Be listening for that. Right now, it's time for CBS News on AM 1320 WFHR.